Hello, everyone. This is Fadi, and I want to welcome you back to a continuation of these amazing video topic, a variety of video topics that I'm doing with our dear brother, Dr. David Wood. And the theme we've covered last time probably is the same theme we're going to cover this time. Last time we talked about a theme related to the perfect preservation of the Quran, or the myth about the perfect preservation, yet we showed that almost 200 verses are gone, missing from one chapter, chapter 33, Surah Al-Ahzab. Today, there is another factor that will make every Muslim basically shake their head and scratch their head, because we're talking about the revealer of the Quran, Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, the model for Muslims and mankind. Believe it or not, Muhammad forgot parts of the Quran. There you have it. If your own leader couldn't remember parts of the Quran, then why do you blame Yasser Qadi for saying there are holes in the narrative? Because the Quran has holes in it right here based on your own leader. Dr. Wood, what say you about this, brother?
Well, it's just an interesting situation that the Muslim world is in. They've been told one thing by their scholars and their da'is and their imams and even their parents and friends and so on. They're told perfect preservation right down to the letter. That's if they are completely in the dark. If they're a bit more educated and or if they have a more honest imam or something like that, then they will find out about different versions of the Qurans, different versions of the Quran in different parts of the world with textual variants and so on. So they might learn about the Hafs version or the Warsh version and so on. So they might learn about some of the textual variants there, but it's very common for them to think that these variants all somehow go back to Muhammad. And so they still might be thinking in terms of like perfect preservation and so on. If you actually go to the Muslim sources, I'm talking about even like the Quran and the Hadith, their most respected Hadith collections, you see all kinds of problems. You start seeing like entire chapters came up missing because Muslims forgot them. Large passages came up missing. Again, hundreds of verses lost just from Surah 33 alone because Aisha had the only copy and a sheep came in and ate it. And so these are the things you find, and you look at this and say, this looks like a disaster. And the disaster goes back to the idea that they were trying to preserve this by human memory alone, except for little parts that they would, early on, it would say they wrote things on like leaves and so on, but these weren't meant to make a book. You're not making a book by writing things on rocks and leaves and so on. These were simply aids to memory. In other words, Muhammad reveals a couple of verses, and then, you might scribble it down on a rock, not to make a book. This is going to help you go back to your home, and then that will help you memorize it if you can read, that you can actually see it over and over again as you work on memorizing it. There's a Chinese proverb that goes, the weakest ink will outlast the strongest memory. And that's just the idea that human memory is flawed and eventually human beings die. Whereas if you at least have it written down, that's going to outlast a human memory. Whereas the entire strategy in early Islam was preserve everything through human memory. What's interesting is that your average Muslim, when you explain, hey, they were trying to preserve things by memory, and this did not end well. They eventually, lost parts of the Quran, and that's what forced them to eventually write down the Quran, was they were losing parts of it, and they didn't want to lose any more. So they said, man, we really need a physical copy here. But your average Muslim will think that when they were preserving this through memory alone, that Muhammad had some sort of miraculous memory, that he wasn't going to forget anything, and that the Muslim community as a whole had such strong memories that they could collectively preserve what's in the Quran. And we know for a fact that Muhammad would forget things, and that the Quran grants this. And the explanation when Muhammad would forget things, or even when the entire Muslim community would forget verses, they would just say that Allah made them forget it because Allah didn't want them to have those verses anymore, which is very interesting because this is supposedly the eternal speech of Allah. He reveals it, and then he makes everyone forget it after he's revealed it. These are it's very silly if you think about it, and yet it's what even very educated Muslims believe. But we're going to look at a quick problem. We're going to look at two verses of the Quran, and we're going to look at two hadiths, and we're going to see how they got some serious problems here with just their theory of how human memory was working back then. So let's go ahead and look at the Quran. This is Surah 87 of the Quran. We're going to look at verses 6 and 7 there, right in the middle. So this is Allah speaking to Muhammad. He says, we shall make you, talking to Muhammad, we shall make you to recite the Quran, so you, Muhammad, shall not forget it. Well, that's good. That sounds like Allah is guaranteeing to protect Muhammad's memory. But so you, Muhammad, shall not forget it. And then, oops, look at the next verse. Except what Allah may will. So you're not going to forget what Allah reveals, except what Allah wants you to forget. He knows what is apparent and what is hidden. So Allah is going to protect Muhammad's memory to remember the Quran, but Allah may change his mind and make Muhammad not remember something. Now watch how this actually plays out when we check out these two hadiths. So look at this, and we have two here. There are a bunch of hadiths on this topic. We're looking at this page just because these are one after another, but there are many more. But let's look at the last one first, because that ties in more with the Quran. That's more connected with the Quran verses we just read. So this is Sahih al-Bukhari, 5039, narrated Abdullah. The Prophet said, why does any one of the people say, I have forgotten such and such verses of the Quran? He, in fact, is caused by Allah to forget. So notice, if you memorize a verse of the Quran and then you forget it, you're not supposed to say, oops, I forgot, shame on me. Instead, you're supposed to say, Allah made me forget that. As if when you forget something because you're too lazy to keep reciting it or something like that, don't blame yourself, blame God for making you forget it. Yeah. So now let's read Surah, this hadith, Sahih al-Bukhari 5038. Look at, because this gets really, really absurd here. Narrated Aisha, Allah's messenger heard a man reciting the Quran at night and said, may Allah bestow his mercy on him, on this man who's reciting the Quran, as he has reminded me of such and such verses of such and such surah, which I was caused to forget, So notice what's going on here. Muhammad hears one of his companions reciting verses of the Quran. Muhammad had forgotten them and concluded that since he forgot them, Allah made him forget them. And then he's thankful to this man for reminding him of verses that Allah supposedly made him forget.
It doesn't make any sense. As if he's celebrating, remembering this. It's almost like Allah, like in Men in Black, used that pen and just
the neuralizer. Yeah, imagine that's a perfect example. I think I'm going to have to make a video along those lines. But notice this is just absurd, right? So even granting the Islamic view of abrogation, God canceling verses or something like that, and then making people forget them. Even if you grant that, I think it's very strange that Allah has this speech from all eternity. He reveals it, and then a day later, or a week later, a month later, or a year later, he says, no, I don't want that anymore. That doesn't apply anymore. And he makes people forget it, as if this is a good explanation for why people forgot it. But notice, if Allah is abrogating a verse, and he so wants to abrogate the verse that he even causes Muhammad to forget it. If he makes Muhammad forget it, he obviously doesn't want the Muslim community to use and apply this verse anymore. And yet Muhammad has a companion who has a better memory than he does, and he's thankful to that man. Thank you for reminding me of that verse, which Allah caused me to forget because Allah wants this verse abrogated. Now, isn't this amazing? Allah so wants to get rid of this verse that he has even Muhammad forget it. But this other guy over here, it's as if it's saying this other guy's memory is so strong, even Allah couldn't make this guy forget. Right. And then Muhammad's very thankful. Thank you for reminding me of these verses that I forgot because Allah made me forget them. And it's like, wait, shouldn't you be condemning this guy? Shame on you for remembering these verses that Allah wants us to forget. Instead, he's thanking this man for having a powerful memory that will help him correct what Allah has done, because Allah wanted him to forget, but now I remember them thanks to this other guy who, unlike Allah, preserved these verses of the Quran. This is ridiculous. I mean, the explanations they're coming up with, it's very simple. Muhammad forgot verses. That's it.
That's right. Exactly.
If entire chapters came up missing, then the entire community forgot them. But they don't want to. They still want to cling to preservation and so on. So, if we all forget, then Allah made us forget. And it's just absurd. And yet this is part of Islam.
But, brother, there is something interesting here. It shows that Muhammad failed miserably in his mission, because if Allah caused him to forget these verses, he should have told the community in advance that if I don't recite verses anymore, or if I tell you forget about this or that, Allah revealed to me that some verses are no longer needed. I obviously didn't do that. And it seemed like the man, like you said, has a stronger memory than the memory of the Prophet of Islam. And what a sad reality indeed. And I hope that our Muslim friends who are watching here just use this logic that David just mentioned. Don't blame Allah. Just admit it. Muhammad forgot parts of the Quran. You wonder now, how many other verses did Muhammad forget? I mean, that's a whole different story and probably a whole different show in and of itself. If he forgot one, he forgot others. And like the story about the satanic verses, if Satan inspired him to reveal some verses and he was allegedly corrected later, how many other verses Muhammad received from Satan and no one told him that they were not from Allah? I mean, yet again, we are dealing with Muhammad, the model for mankind. In this regard, I would say, yes, he is a model, because we all forget. Anything else, David, you want to add to this?
Nope, that's good.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Please make sure you comment, ask questions, interact with me or with David in one of his channels, which is the Apologetic Roadshow, or at least if you can find him on other places. And I think he will have a website as well. So make sure you interact with all of us. And if you have any specific questions, please shoot them our way. Thank you, everyone. This is Al Fadi. God bless. Take care.